The movie is based on real events. The ad in the newspaper looked quite innocuous. Stanford University was looking for male students to participate in a psychological experiment simulating prison life. The reward was $15 a day. Those eager to make easy money immediately came to the organizer of the experiment. The interview took place in a dreary office where 3 organizers ascertained their psychological state. After that, the organizers chose their role by tossing coins. Heads, the warden; tails, the prisoner. In the summer of 1971, an empty underground room at the university was turned into a makeshift prison. Narrow corridors, metal bars, surveillance cameras. The warden was ordered not to use physical violence. Then the experiment began. The prisoner was given a baggy robe and a chain around his leg. The organizers watched the whole thing closely from behind monitors. Among them was a visiting counselor who knew how a real prison worked. The first day went smoothly, they chatted carefree. But that didn't last long. When it was time to line up, they were led out into the corridor and lined up in a row. The guards, still unsure of themselves from the morning, gripped their batons tighter. Some scrutinized the faces of the prisoners, others reread the rules. It was at this point that the experiment ceased to be a game. After the formation, the first shift leaves and the next 3 take its place. Lunch goes quietly until one of the prisoners asks for a cigarette. But John declares that smoking is a privilege, and privileges must be earned. Wayne is annoyed by the chatter at the table, and he brings his baton down forcefully on the surface, silencing everyone. The organizer notices that the wardens have begun to get into character and decides not to intervene. The next day, the wardens ignore the prisoner's inquiry about the conditions of detention. Tension builds. The wardens conduct a roll call, intimidating the prisoners by forcing them to repeat the numbers over and over, making it harder each time. When the prisoners start laughing, the guards invent new punishments, turning the procedure into a humiliating spectacle. The organizers are delighted. The guards have completely fulfilled their role and need no further guidance. Unable to tolerate the humiliation, Daniel refuses to participate in this circus. For his insolence, he is thrown into the SHU, a small, dark cell where the walls are pressurized and the air seems as thick as tar. Meanwhile, Wayne, smugly smirking, tells the new shift of wardens about his methods. Inspired by his tales, the new trio decides to stage a nighttime inspection. They wake up the prisoners and force them to perform exercises. Any attempt to resist leads to more punishment. Those who resist are thrown into the punishment cell. Daniel loses his temper and attacks the warden. But they are outnumbered. The organizers cannot believe what is happening and decide not to intervene. The next day, one of the prisoners demands his glasses back. In response, he is isolated in solitary confinement. To protest the humiliation, the prisoners lock themselves in their cells and refuse to come out. Not expecting such a reaction from them, the warders turn to the doctor. The doctor, in turn, gives them complete freedom of action. As if having received official authorization for violence, the warders move into action. They break into the cells and force the prisoners out of their hiding places. Mattresses and pillows are taken away, and those who resist are brutally tied up. The organizers watch with cold interest. The experiment has entered a new phase. Dr. Zimbardo watched the experiment with growing interest. The wardens delved deeper and deeper into their roles, finding ever more subtle ways to pressure the prisoners. Those who voluntarily surrendered their mattresses were allowed to eat dinner, while the rest were left hungry. At night, Daniel decided to escape. But unfortunately, his escape was not successful. On the next shift, John Wayne used a fire extinguisher to intimidate the prisoners and then broke into the cell of Peter and his comrades. Wayne, transfixed by his own sense of authority, made a bombastic speech about discipline and magnanimously promised to return their clothes and beds, hinting that everything depended on their behavior. Daniel shouted from the SHU that he needed a doctor, but his cries went unanswered. The prisoners could have revolted, but none dared. Daniel broke down. He thrashed hysterically, screaming into the security camera that he wanted to go free. No one stood up for him because everyone was afraid. On the third day, Dr. Zimbard gets word that Daniel has been released. The organizers, so as not to provoke further conflict, allowed them to meet with relatives the next day. Zimbardo doubled security for fear of escape. 819 complained of indisposition, but his requests were ignored. Instead, they were given an appointment with a pastor. The meaning of what was happening was unclear. Meanwhile, the warders lined up the prisoners and had them chant, 819 is misbehaving. The unfortunate man had a nervous breakdown. Fearing a scandal, Zimbardo allowed him to leave. On the fifth day, Christina Moslick, Zimbardo's fiancée, showed up. She took the observer's seat. At this time, a newcomer was brought into the prison. He refused to eat prison food. He was sent to a cell with a plate until he changed his mind. Organizers scheduled a parole hearing. Christina noticed that the prisoners were frightened and the observers, forgetting their duties, turned into torturers. The participants in the experiment were driven to exhaustion, some to hysteria. A former criminal, whom the doctor personally invited to observe the experiment, felt remorse for the first time. He withdrew from further participation in the observation, realizing that he had gone too far. On the night shift, led by John Wayne, the situation became increasingly disturbing. In the holding cell they found the newcomer emaciated and crawling with hunger. With bitterness in his voice, he said that the wardens and organizers did not consider them human at all, and this was a direct violation of the rules of the experiment. When Christine saw the prisoners being led down the corridor with paper bags on their heads, her patience ran out and she quarreled with her fiancé. It wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a moral decay that couldn't be ignored. After their quarrel, the experiment took a terrible turn. The warders, driven by their own madness, began to abuse the prisoners. They made them swear, do push-ups, imitate obscene acts. Zimbardo finally realized the nightmare into which he had plunged these people. This was not scientific research, it was true barbarism, hidden under the cloak of an academic report. And so, in the midst of the warden's abuse, he, stunned by his own carelessness, makes a decision that should have come much earlier, to put an end to this nightmare. But the prisoners did not even immediately realize that they were free. They were still in this maze of fear and submission. The prisoners finally returned to reality, but not all of them can forget those days. Years later, they sit around the table, avoiding each other's gaze because for each of them, the experience left an indelible mark. Surprisingly, none of them came out of the experiment with permanent mental trauma, at least, that's what the official version claims. However, despite this, the experiment itself became a living proof that even the strongest and most independent people can break down if they are put in the right conditions. When the general public learned about the movie, new data immediately appeared, which exploded the basis of the entire experiment. It turned out that the organizers had deliberately incited the guards to aggression. These revelations undermine the credibility of the study's results. If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and put a like on the channel. See you soon.